This is a video on why heavyweights have improved to the level they have today, and why heavyweights are going to continue to get bigger and improve as the decades go by. Why the heavyweights in 30 years will easily dominate the heavyweights of today, and why I believe the heavyweights of today would easily dominate the heavyweights of the 60s and 70s. Now, first off, you've got to understand why America dominated the 50s, 60s, 70s so easily. And if you think about it, it's to do with the war. In World War II, cities and countries just got bombed entirely all over Europe, Britain, and the only place that really wasn't affected but had a massive part in the Second World War was America. Yes, Pearl Harbor got bombed, but the cities didn't get razed to the ground like they did over in Europe, in Russia, in Britain. Now, how did this affect Britain and Europe so badly? Well, obviously, apart from just the deaths of the young men at the time, you had rationing. The food supply was short. Half of Britain's economy, for example, was spent on weapons development. So people were on rations. They were hungry. They weren't getting proper nutrition. People were getting. This is when they first developed vitamins and started handing them out. And the rations kept continuing until the early to late 1950s. So you had a generation of people not growing up to their full height, not growing up to their full size, just because of lack of nutrition and lack of food supply. America didn't have that problem at the time. America wasn't razed to the ground. America was still plentiful in food and was actually doing very well in the 1950s, unlike Europe and unlike Britain. And another thing is, if you're in such a poor country like that, you're less likely to go into a profession like football and boxing because there's less money floating around in that country to get spent on luxuries like buying tickets to these sort of events. So you're more likely, if you are talented, to just get a job, settle down, have kids. So it stops the competition that way as well. It's not just the lack of food. A lot of these people just have to take normal jobs instead of maybe meeting their full potential in sports like they were allowed to in America. And I know there was a lot of boxers came from poverty in America as well. Sonny Liston, for example's mum and dad had 27 kids and they worked in a sugarcane plantation. But it was significantly worse in Europe and Britain. So that's one reason why America dominated so much. Obviously in America the population increased just like everywhere else. It got more competitive. Eventually in the 80s you had people like Bruno, Lennox coming over, and it got more competitive again. And eventually the thing you have to remember is Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union, were not allowed to compete in pro boxing. And as soon as the Iron Curtain was broken, the Berlin Wall was brought down, and they were eventually allowed to fight in pro boxing, they eventually just took over the whole heavyweight division. People like Nikolai Valuev, the Klitschko's, Alexander Povetkin just completely taken over. And it's an increasing competition again, because now you've got a fully fed, Britain and Western Europe. You've got all of the Soviet Union able to fight in pro boxing. You've got all America fighting in pro boxing. So it's got far more competitive again. That's why the athletes are getting bigger all the time. They're getting bigger, they're getting heavier, they're getting stronger. And yes, I know, of course, there's the fact of steroids and performance-enhancing drugs, but steroids and performance-enhancing drugs do not make people taller. They don't make people taller. And average height is increased all the time. It's because it's getting more competitive, the population keeps increasing, more parts of the world are allowed to compete in the sport, and it gets more competitive, and you get bigger heavyweights and stronger heavyweights at the top. Now, eventually, and it's already started happening, is China for example, of a lot of heavyweights right now. I know of two for a fact that are in the top 100 heavyweights right now, and that trend's going to increase dramatically very soon. China has over 1 billion people in that country alone. There's obviously the rest of Asia, a very massive part of the world, got a few billion people there, and as they get richer and they get better nutrition, and the people living in the rural areas of China move into the cities and have more spending power and can raise their kids under better conditions with more food, they're going to have a massive increase in height and freedom to choose, sports, and they're going to be able to compete in pro boxing as well. And I think Asia, in the next 20 or 30 years, is really going to start dominating the heavyweight division, just like Eastern Europe dominated it the past 15 years. I see, China and the rest of Asia are just completely taken over. Now, yes, I know, for Japan, for example, Japan has a very well-fed population, and on average, they are smaller than the people from Britain and America. But when you're looking at China and the rest of Asia, you're talking about billions of people. And if you've got a well-fed population of billions of people, and even though they're smaller on average, since there's so much more of them, there's going to be so many more 6'6", 6'8" giants in China than there will be in Western Europe and America. So I can see them completely taking over. I mean, until recently, 7 out of 10 of the top heavyweights in the world were from Eastern Europe. I think it was only a year ago, 7 out of 10 of the heavyweights in the world were Eastern Europe. And I can see in another 30 years, 7 out of 10 of them are going to be from Asia. And you're going to have the odd guy from, Eastern Europe, one odd guy from America, and one odd guy from, Western Europe, including Britain, in the heavyweight division. I can just see them completely taking over, just because of the size of their population, competing in pro boxing. So I can see boxing having the potential to get far more competitive than it's ever been in its history and it's ever is right now. And I can see heavyweights continuing to get bigger and better as every single decade passes. And I don't know when it's going to be stopped. Another thing you've got to remember is you have Cuba that's not allowed to compete right now. Well, they prevent the people from competing right now. But since ties are being made with America right now, it's possible that Cuba will eventually, maybe, start allowing their boxers to compete in pro boxing as well. And I think that'll make a massive difference to how competitive heavyweight boxing is. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the next 20 or 30 years to see what happens. I can't see any reason it could be otherwise unless there's another massive world recession and the food supply isn't there for them. That's what I think is going to happen.